backup, archiving, and disaster recovery. And what we're proposing is a model, a technical model, that lets us address all of those with a single system. So I'll spend a few minutes today talking about what we think is the broken state of enterprise recovery. That is being driven by the massive growth in data that businesses are generating and collecting and keeping. I want to talk about some of the issues with backups. I won't spend a lot of time on it because this is a section of this presentation where we tend to get people in the audience nodding their heads. I think all of you are familiar with these issues. And then talk about something that has happened in the last few years, this fragmented approach to providing data and workload protection. And we think it started out for good reasons and is now leading companies in the wrong direction. Then we're going to lay out what we think the requirements are for a new approach to solve this fragmentation and make protection of enterprise data and workloads a lot easier, a lot more efficient. Quickly discuss some of the enabling technologies that are available that let us get to this new model, and then explain what this three-phase workload protection model is. So let's talk about enterprise recovery and what some of the issues are with it. This is just a very small sampling of the data that I've been able to find on the internet on the growth in business data. You see the quote there from Gartner, and you see these various surveys about total amount of business data. No matter where you turn, you see this same exponential curve. The amount of data that needs to be stored, backed up, archived keeps going up, and that's because the scope of the data that is required to be held continues to increase through regulations. The retention period continues to increase as companies seek to protect themselves, or again as they have to oblige regulatory agencies. And then the data itself continues to increase. More and larger electronic files, larger multimedia, graphics, audio, video, all of this has now become part of the corporate data. So I think this is a pain point that is well understood and has been well documented, as you can see. And for those of you who are in the business of backing this data up, archiving it, making it accessible in the event of a disaster, you're well familiar with the challenges that this data growth poses. There are 4 issues with backup that I'd like to quickly touch on, and again, I won't belabor this. Our understanding is that most of you get this pretty well, especially if you have to deal with this on a daily basis. If you're doing tape, God help you, there's a lot of issues with tape. There are costs around it. We talk to a lot of small to mid-sized businesses in particular who are surprised at how much more expensive their backup solution ends up being over its lifetime than what they had budgeted. The data growth that we just talked about a second ago drives the cost of more and more tapes. And then when you want to get those tapes off-site to a vault, that's a cost that, again, surprisingly, some businesses never really factor in. They just factor in the cost of some hardware, some software, and maybe some amount of tape media. Tape also has physical limitations that can be exposed at exactly the wrong time. You don't want to find out in the middle of a crisis that you've got old tapes that have been reused one time too many and that you can't actually trust to give you a perfect digital replica of what you're trying to recover. Backup is slow. The idea of having a backup window in the middle of the night when you've got no employees, no customers, no end users banging on your systems, that's been an outdated notion for at least a decade. For most businesses these days, there is no such thing as a backup window. There is no time of day or night or weekend when it's convenient to just tell everybody to get offline so you can get a quiescent backup of everything. And yet, surprisingly, most backup solutions continue to insist on this sort of thing. Recovery in the event that you need to get data back, particularly if we're talking about a disaster, takes a very long time. Backup tapes just aren't appropriate for doing disaster recovery. You're talking about shipping tapes back to some sort of failover site from wherever the vault was. you need to rebuild servers, et cetera, et cetera. You're talking about recovery time measured in days, and that's just too long. Backup isn't tested. It's not designed where you can run through a failover test. People don't say, hey, let's test our ability to recover a certain database or a certain file. It's not built into the solutions. Companies don't have a methodology for testing. And that means that if you're going to eventually need to do a recovery, you're hoping that your backup solution worked. You're hoping, and as every salesperson I've ever worked with likes to say, hope is not a strategy. And then this issue of backups being so slow, what it means is that you've got a recovery time objective that's probably going to be measured in hours for single server, days certainly for an entire data center. Your recovery point objective might also be measured in days. If you're just doing a single daily snapshot or backup, you might lose a day's worth of data. And again, there aren't a lot of businesses out there anymore that can afford that. And I didn't bring any statistics with me today, but you'll find them out there, these surveys that show what % of small, mid-sized businesses end up going out of business after a disaster if they weren't prepared. You can see the data from Hurricane Katrina, right? That's now been long enough ago that the data has been collected about how many businesses along the Gulf Coast that were affected by the hurricane never came back because they were offline for too long. Their customers went somewhere else. So that's backup. Now, disaster recovery, which is really where we're trying to get everybody to. Why doesn't every company have a disaster recovery plan and a disaster recovery solution in place? Well, because the traditional approach was really complicated and really expensive, right? You had to go to one of the big companies, give them a big check, and that check bought you duplicate colo space, duplicate racks and power, duplicate hardware, duplicate software. You had to rebuild your entire IT data center somewhere else and pay somebody to manage it for you. And it's really expensive. The other alternative was do it yourself. And DIY is far too complicated for all but the larger companies. Also very expensive because, again, you're into this issue of replicating, duplicating everything in your IT data center. And it gets really complicated in terms of keeping that replica site completely up to date. Think about how many times per month you patch an operating system or update software. And if you want to have a real DR target site, you need to update all those things on the target site as well. And then testing. Testing is hard. Testing with legacy approaches to DR typically interrupted your production environment. And as we were saying earlier about backup windows, there's no good time to do that. So a lot of businesses just threw up their hands in exasperation and they don't have a DR plan at all. We'd like to help fix that. A more recent phenomenon is that the approach to backing up data or providing archives or providing some sort of continuity solution has fragmented. If you look at the email space, for example, you've got vendors such as MessageOne that popped up because they saw the opportunity to provide an online SaaS-based near real-time solution for providing Microsoft Exchange continuity. Great solution. A lot of companies like that idea. But all that does is address your email. It does nothing for the rest of your business systems. Some companies then, as we talked about earlier, they do backup and then send the tapes off-site. And somehow, trucks have become part of their IT infrastructure. And that just seems weird to me. You see pockets of use of cloud storage, whether it's the end users with their free Dropbox accounts or maybe at a corporate level using something more like box.net. So you've got some of your corporate data off-site in this other repository. And then you may or may not have tried a do-it-yourself DR facility. And so there may be a remote site. What's been replicated there? And so you've got different pockets of data backed up, replicated, archived, whatever the use case is, in a variety of vendors, services, and solutions. That means that when you look at the big picture, the company's spending too much money on these solutions, almost certainly. It's very complicated. You've now got something that's impossible to test in a disaster. There's no way for you to test this and say, okay, we know that if the big one hits, we're ready. It would be impossible. So we want to try to put an end to this and say, is there a way to have a single solution that can address all these things? So backup is painful, but seen as necessary, right? You need to back up your data and your workloads. And by the way, we are going to talk about workloads here, by which we mean a complete snapshot of a server, the operating system, the application, and the data running on it, rather than just, you know, the data at some sort of file level. So we see this one instance where customers are changing their backup solutions at an alarming rate. This 20% number also comes from Gartner. Companies just don't like their backup solution. It's frustrating. It's hard. It's more expensive than they thought. And then they just buy a different backup solution. So it's out of the frying pan and into the fire. And then DR, it's expensive, it's complicated, it's seen by those who are somewhat short-sighted as being a non-necessary insurance policy. So how do we fix this? So the requirements for a new approach, let's start with a blank sheet of paper here. What we want is for backup to just become a byproduct of a continual process of data protection and replication, right? So that backup is no longer a product category, it's no longer a solution, it's just something that you get as a feature of a broader, more holistic approach to protecting your business. Right? And then archiving should just become a matter of determining by policy that a snapshot of your server data is now old enough that you wouldn't actually do a recovery from it in the case of a lost server or a lost data center. At this point in time, you're saving it for policy purposes having to do with legal and regulatory compliance reasons. We don't want to have any manual processes in here. We want this to be a set and forget kind of solution so that it doesn't tax the resources, particularly in a smaller or mid-sized company. It should just become part of the fabric of your data center. Whether your use case is backup, disaster recovery, archiving, you should be doing all this from the same administrative interface. Recovery point objectives should be very, very short. A recovery point objective of a day is far from adequate. We need to get it down to less than an hour so that if you have a failure of a system or something affects your entire data center, you're not losing lots of data. Most of the disasters, quote-unquote disasters, that our customers face are what we refer to as the everyday disasters, the little things that affect a file or a database or maybe a server, but not the capital D disaster that we think of with blackouts and earthquakes and hurricanes. And those everyday disasters, a server fails because the power supply got fried, right? Or a virus attacked a server and wiped out some data. You don't want to have to pick up the phone, call some disaster recovery vendor, declare a failover, and go through all of that and change IP addresses and redirect your end users, right? That's not necessary. What you want is the ability to have a replica right there on the LAN in your data center that you can quickly mount as a disk or spin up as a functioning server and get back to work and do it all at LAN speed, self-service, right? You're back in business in 5, 10, 15 minutes. That's got to be part of the solution. But, of course, we also have to have the remote site for when it is one of those capital D disasters. You really have to have a true offsite solution, and we're not talking about somebody in the IT department jumps in his car, drives to the tape vault, and takes the tapes back to his own garage where you've got a server, right? That doesn't work. It's not a DR plan if you don't test it. This is the most common thing that we have to reinforce with people that we talk to. Testing is a pain. We understand that. So one of the requirements for a new approach is it's got to be easy to test. Test it whenever you feel like it. It does not affect production environment. End users will have no idea that you're doing a test, but it gives your IT organization and the other business stakeholders a chance to really exercise the solution so that you know that if you actually ever have to use it, it's going to work, right? Your business will not be at jeopardy. This should be hardware independent, right? We're going to try to avoid vendor lock-in here. This should all work automatically. Policies should be set by the customer about the aging of these workloads, which ones are useful for backup, which ones are useful for off-site disaster recovery, which ones should be archived, how long should they be kept. And of course, it has to be secure. We are talking about a remote site, and we're talking about all of your business data, which includes incredibly sensitive documents. So the solution has to be secure, goes without saying. The model that we're proposing, and I'm going to get to on the next slide, leverages a lot of technologies that have emerged in the last 5 or 10 years, right? So we're not talking about a model that we have to wait for some indistinct future, right? This exists today. This is what we're doing right now at NScaled. And it's not magic because we're just leveraging technologies that are very well understood. There's nothing here that our customers aren't already very familiar with. Virtualization of both compute and storage. Continuous data protection technologies. So we're not talking about that once-a-night backup anymore. We're talking about the snapshotting or the replication or the mirroring, whatever you want to call it, of a system every 15 minutes, maybe even less. We're talking about data deduplication, right? So getting back to the first point we made today about the enormous growth of data, we've got to be smart about data deduplication so that we're not bursting at the seams trying to store all this stuff. And then WAN optimization, because we are talking about the need, again, to put things off-site in the cloud. You want to WAN optimize to get those snapshots off of your data center out to the cloud. Got to make that happen as quickly as possible. You don't want to tie up the bandwidth forever. And then in the event of a disaster, end users connecting to a failover server somewhere remotely, you want that to be a good end user experience as well. So these enabling technologies, they exist. It's all about pulling them together into the right architecture. So this model that we refer to as three-phase workload protection basically looks at, there's the primary workload. That's your production environment. That's your SQL database server. That's your Microsoft Exchange, whatever it might be. We're going to snapshot that thing every 15 minutes, maybe every hour. It depends on the criticality of that system. And we want to store that snapshot on a system that is on your network, that is local to your data center. Those snapshots, they can be mounted as disks if you just need to recover a file or some data. But they can also be spun up as virtual machines and run as your primary production server in the event that you need to do so if you've lost a whole server. It all happens on your premises, on your LAN, very fast. It's self-service. You don't have to call anybody up and declare a disaster. We're taking advantage of virtualization and virtual storage to let a single appliance be the target for perhaps dozens of servers in your environment. That appliance then replicates all those snapshots off of your premises. We do it securely over VPN or MPLS out to a remote data center that NScaled has built, we maintain. So now we've got copies off your premises, and we've done it quickly with data deduplication and WAN optimization, and we're storing them there. This is for the scenario that you lose your data center. You've had a blackout or there's a hurricane. We had several of our customers affected by Hurricane Irene last summer, for example, who needed to declare a disaster. You spin up servers in virtual machines in our cloud environment. We automatically handle all of the redirection of IPs. Your end users get back to work as usual, minimal latency. And you can have, again, it's about probably 10 or 15 minutes per server, an entire data center. You're back up and running in 2 hours. Right? For a lot of the customers that we work with today, the idea that they can do a complete failover and have everything back in a couple of hours, right, that was mind-boggling to them. Because if they even had tried to have a DR solution, they had cobbled together something that was going to take them a day or two to get back online. So this is an order of magnitude improvement in their ability to respond to a disaster and keep their business up and running. Eventually, a snapshot that you've taken of a server gets old enough where you probably wouldn't want to use it to boot up from. It's, you know, a week, it's a month old, whatever that might be. But you may have a legal reason or a regulatory reason why you want to hang on to that data for another year or 5 or 10, and that's when you want to archive it. And with archiving, we're not really worried too much about spinning things up as servers. We are worried about being able to go get data and recover data. What we're worried about is the security, the long-term stability, the immutability of the storage here, and price, because we know that the amount of data in a company archive, it only goes up, right? So it's about having it be cost-effective for companies. All of these use cases or modes, whatever you want to call them, sitting on top of a single platform that encompasses everything from the agents that are doing the snapshotting on the primary servers to the appliance, to the data centers, and the administrative interface they would use to access all this, all a single solution. When you use this phased workload recovery approach, you end up with a solution that's easier because we've made backup, archiving, and disaster recovery basically all one and the same. It's simply a question of what do you need? Do you need to recover some data quickly off of a local replica? Do you need to spin up a server, or are you having a real bad day and your data center's down and you need to fail over? One administrative interface, right? So we've gotten rid of that big mess where you've got trucks taking tapes one place and you've got online backup your email somewhere else, et cetera, et cetera. You know where all of your data is, and you've got multiple copies, right? You've got your original production copy, you've got a copy on that local appliance, you've got another copy out in the cloud data center. And you don't have to worry about managing those copies. It's all automatic, it's all lights out. This is far less expensive, right? You're not dealing with multiple vendors and multiple solutions that overlap. It's a single solution designed to do all of these functions seamlessly. And it's going to cost you far, far less than putting all these together yourself. For some of our customers, the appeal is it's all been integrated, it's all been simplified, and it's going to cost a little bit less. For a lot of our customers, the appeal is they finally can do DR. They've never done it before. It was always priced beyond their reach. It was always too complicated. It was always just too much work for the small IT team that they had. So for some, that's the big win, is they can finally have DR at all. And this is flexible, right? With the big legacy DR providers, everything is seen through the lens of, you know, what happens when the big one hits? What happens when you lose your whole data center? That's important, but that's not everything. It's those small everyday disasters. And so the three-phase workload recovery model says you're ready for everything. Somebody deletes a file by accident, great, you're protected. Right? Your entire electrical grid goes down, okay, you're also protected from that and everything in between. So the nScaled architecture, the customer infrastructure is there on the left. We install agents on your servers to do the snapshotting. That appliance sitting in the middle comes from us. It's part of our solution. And by the way, we don't sell it to you up front. It's just part of the monthly fee, so there are no capital costs with this approach. That appliance, again, acts as a recovery target you can fail over to for one of those small disasters. And then over secure connection, we replicate those snapshots out to our cloud data centers. We have 4 around the world currently, and we expect to double that number this year. So we've got a lot of choices where our customers can park their data. And unlike some of the other cloud solutions that have been in the news, your data is exactly where you think it is. We don't shuffle it around from data center to data center as suits us. That data is where you want it to be. It never goes anywhere else. So that's it. That is what three-phase workload recovery is. I'd be delighted to answer any questions that you might have. I know I went through some of the earlier material pretty quickly, but as I said, we've found that a lot of people just nod their heads about the pain of doing backups. Let's see if we've got any questions coming in. Definitely have a few minutes before we want to let you guys go. Give you guys another minute here. Well, either I've bored all of you to tears or it was all crystal clear. Either way, I really appreciate you joining us today, listening to what we had to say. If you've got any questions, please check out our website, nscaled.com. And with that, we're going to wrap up the presentation. Thank you, everyone.